Thank you for having me. My name is Dan Hromada. We're going to get the PowerPoint going here in a second. And you are going to get a crash course in 15 minutes, right? That's all I get. And something I've been studying for a number of years. We have a huge problem in our country that people kind of know about, but they don't really know all the details. So that's why I'm here to talk to you about a state law called American Laws for American Courts, and then why it's so necessary that we have this state law come through. But I'm going to wait for the PowerPoint. There we go. So there's my name, Dan Hromada. I run the Cleveland chapter, or what I thought was going to start as a Cleveland chapter. It's turned into the Northeast Ohio chapter for Act for America. Next slide. Okay, American Laws for American Courts, otherwise known as ALAC, is Ohio House Bill 513. It is in 8 states now: Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Louisiana, Florida, North Carolina, Washington State, and then it's on the ballot for a referendum for the Alabama voters in November, and we don't anticipate any problems there. Next slide. Okay, House Bill 513, the main sponsor is State Rep Matt Lynch from Bainbridge. Co-sponsors are reps are John Adams, John Becker, Terry Boos, Andrew Brenner, Ron Hood, Ron Magg, Wes Rutherford, and Andy Thompson. Next. Next, please. Okay. Here, I'm going to read the exact beginning of the bill. It's a bill to enact Section 2701.01 of the revised code to prohibit courts, administrative agencies, and arbitrators from applying foreign law, and that's a key word right there, foreign law, to the detriment of the Constitution rights of Ohio residents under United States and Ohio constitutions. So please remember that, all foreign law. Next slide. Why is it ALAC needed? We have 140 cases of Sharia law being applied at the appellate level. So this is not an anti-Sharia bill, this is an anti-foreign law bill. Sharia happens to be one of the possible components, and right now it's the most prevalent. 140 cases at the appellate level. That means there's literally hundreds at the lower levels that never have never reached the appellate level. This is setting dangerous precedent. Next slide. Okay, Act for America is the nation's largest grassroots national security movement. Our purpose and mission is combat radical Islam and the spread of Sharia law. And I should have put this up there. The number one way to do that is to educate the public. Ever become very familiar with it. We have 875 chapters around the world, 289,000 members. Next slide. This is Brigitte Gabriel. Okay. We see her on Fox News quite a bit, with Hannity especially, because Hannity's all over this situation. Next slide. One of my heroes, I met him last year. Congressman Allen West, who really knows what we're up against. Physically, literally from the battlefield to what's going on in DC. Next slide. Okay, we have several threats in the war on terror. There's Al-Qaeda, or that's morphed into ISIS and Boko Haram and all the rest of these organizations, but there's much more than that. There is the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're conducting stealth or civilization jihad in this country, and that's what I'm going to explain to you. We're also up against the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. That is an organization that is the 56 Muslim countries and the Palestinian territories. And even though they're fighting with each other right now, as they've done over the course of history, Shia and Sunni, they still have an organization, and they are influencing policy around the world. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And of course, political correctness, like everything else that we're facing. So, next slide. Okay, if you would just click in a minute on the black screen, I'm going to show you a quick 4-minute video of a video that I've been showing around Greater Cleveland for the last year. It's a half-hour to an hour video. There's a couple of them. It's called Jihad in America. It's done by Steve Emerson from the Investigative Project on Terrorism. And I'll get into Steve's work in a little bit later in the thing. But if you can click on the black screen. Maybe dim the lights when it comes on.
The Muslim Brotherhood is an international movement, the goal of which is to create universal, all over the world. In my mind, the Muslim Brotherhood is the mother of all Islamic organizations of the 20th century, including Al-Qaeda.
They believe that Western civilization is corrupt, is evil, is decadent, and they want to dismantle it.
Because if you remain on the side of injustice, the wrath of God will come. Please, all Americans, you remember that Allah is watching everyone. God is watching everyone. If you continue doing injustice and tolerate injustice, the wrath of God will come.
برنامج الإخوان المسلمين كل الإسلاميين والإخوان المسلمين إلى العدالة هو العودة إلى الخلافة، العودة إلى حسب الخلفاء الراشدين، العودة إلى تطبيق الشريعة، والعودة إلى الجهاد.
The Muslim Brotherhood is like the Russian ball. It's one organization inside another, inside another, inside another, and it's endless. You never have complete sense of it unless you have the totality of the goals. They are very, very clever if you are privy to their master plan.
The Ikhwan, which is what the Brotherhood uses to describe themselves, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging this miserable house by their hands in the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. That's pretty clear as to how they viewed their own objective. And this is, we're talking about the United States here.
Our job is to change the Constitution of America.
فتحوا الدعوة هذا ما نأمله إن شاء الله. سنفتح أوروبا وسنفتح أمريكا لا بالشيء ولكن بالدعوة.
There was a systematic plan to establish an Islamist beachhead in the United States with the eventual goal of watching the United States crumble from within and establishing Islamic rule in this country.
The West, as we see today, instead of isolating the Muslim Brotherhood, actually engaging the Muslim Brotherhood as the organization that's moderate, and these are the Muslims we can talk to. The West is tremendously naive about the danger of these various Islamic organizations.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, that's a DVD. Actually, you can get some versions on YouTube. And at the end of my talk this morning, I'm going to do exactly what Ted said and close and ask that you communicate with me. I will send you, not a ton of stuff to overwhelm you, but like the link to that video or where you can buy the video, you can get it from me. I made a deal with him to get them at a reduced rate. That's what I've been doing to certain groups around the state, is sending them out, buying them from him. Well, we'll talk afterwards. Okay. That's what's happening. It started with Kirsten, and she's steered me everywhere. So, okay. In 2004, the FBI raided a home in Annandale, Virginia. And in the basement, they found, actually a sub-basement, they found the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hundreds of documents. And these documents, many of them were used in a trial called the Holy Land Foundation trial of 2008. Has anybody heard of that trial? Okay, that's very encouraging as well. Okay, so then in that trial, about a little over 130 people were convicted for laundering $12 million to Hamas. And there was supposed to be a second part of that trial. And this is what a lot of people don't realize. There are over 300 unindicted co-conspirators, and I have the list here, and we'll have it at my table, that are waiting for the follow-up for that trial, or those trials and they've not been allowed to happen. Congress has been after these documents. Eric Holder is sitting on them in the Justice Department, will not release them. Louis Gohmert has been on his case over and over and over about getting those documents. And that is so key. Okay, next slide. There are 29 Muslim Brotherhood front groups identified, or 29 organizations listed as Muslim Brotherhood front groups operating in the United States. And with that trial hanging in the balance, these organizations are still allowed to happen, or still allowed to work, operate in our society. The Muslim Students Association. I can't go through all 29 of them, but this is a big one. They're on every college campuses. So we have anti-Semitism growing at incredible rates. We have them influencing what speakers can come to. When Condoleezza Rice wanted to talk to Rutgers, it was the Muslim Students Association that shut that down. The Islamic Society of North America, and this is a key one to understand, or ISNA. Okay, because I'll get in to show you a little bit later. That was the guy in the film at the 2006 ISNA convention in Illinois about changing it. It says it's their job to change the Constitution. That is the true goal of ISNA. And they also are the biggest interfaith partner in the country to many religious organizations. And the religious organizations don't know about any of this. Okay, the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE. Okay, that's a front group for Hamas. Next slide. Okay, there's our, click on him again, please. I want to really drive this point home.
Our job is to change the Constitution of America.
That is in 2006. They are working at this plan. Okay, in 1991, one of the documents used in the trial, there was a plan hatched by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's called the Explanatory Memorandum. We have a copy of it. It's a generational plan on how to change this country. And they are executing their plan because of this trial, so they're still allowed to operate in this country. Next. Okay. One of the ways they're going to do it is start to get involved in our government. We now have Congressman Keith Ellison, who was the first congressman to swear in on a Quran. We have Congressman Andre Carson in Indiana. And we have a convert in our CIA director, John Brennan. Next slide. You've seen this email going around? Okay, we have 43 members of the Muslim Brotherhood working in the current administration. 6 of them in key advisory roles, the top 6 right there, who are influencing policy. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. I got 2 minutes left, really? Oh boy. Well, please give me a little bit more. Okay. I drove all the way from Parma and I don't get paid a dime, please. Okay. All right. So, Mohammed El-Biari, second guy on the left, and Mohammed Majid. Mohammed El-Biari is a senior fellow at the Department of Homeland Security. Mohammed Majid, a couple friends of mine that came with me this morning, we just saw him in April in Cleveland at an interfaith dialogue. And he is responsible for changing DHS guidelines. Next slide. In 2010, our guidelines were changed. All of a sudden, Christians, along with Southern Poverty Law Center, got involved too. But you know about Christians all of a sudden were listed as terrorists, or threats, Catholics, returning vets. Okay. They're advocating Sharia. We could show you a document that came out, was from their website, where they're allowing Sharia to be talked about and introduced. Okay? And the way they're doing it is they change these guidelines and say, don't use moderate Muslims, in other words, ones who are against Sharia, as their trainers to any law enforcement agencies. Next slide. In 2012, hundreds of FBI files, training manuals, and presentations were removed and purged within 6 weeks. The federal government does nothing in 6 weeks. Okay. The trainers that were there, Patriot trainers that were used for years, training our intelligence, our military, okay, we're all fired. Next slide. Okay, Fort Hood shooting. Here's a classic example of political correctness run amok. Major Nadal Hassan had business cards with the initials SOA on them. Soldier of Allah. Okay, he shouted Allahu Akbar when he gunned down everybody. He was outraged by the refusal to accept law of Allah, Sharia, to be the supreme law of the land. The administration continues to classify this as workplace violence to this day. Now, I've had to slide up for a year, but to this day it's still workplace violence. Even though he was convicted and sentenced to death, he is there preventing the survivors from getting benefits, okay, and there's a lot going on here. And when it happened, General George Casey, this has affected our military too, and I remember seeing this with Stephanopoulos on ABC, said that as bad as the deaths of the 13 soldiers were, it would be an even greater tragedy if our diversity becomes a casualty. This is absolute nuts. And this is what's going on in Europe, okay, and it's coming our way. Next slide. Okay, CARE and the IRS. In 2012, just prior to the election, about August of 2012, they received immediate nonprofit status approval after improper filing for years. And it was done by our friend Lois Lerner. Next slide. We now have Al Jazeera English. It's said they're going to get TV stations, radio stations, get involved in the media. Okay, next slide. Mosques. In the year 2000, we had about 800 mosques in the country. We now have up over 2,200 mosques in the country. They're building them at record pace. The owners of the mosques are the North American Islamic Trust. I didn't show them before, but it's another Muslim Brotherhood front group. They're building mosques everywhere around the country. Next slide. Okay, you've seen this picture possibly on email. This was happening down in Texas. This is how blatant it was under C-scope. Glenn Peck put a stop to this down there, but it's still going on around the country. Heavy proselytization. This has been going on since the 90s. Next slide. Common Core. This is all I can tell you about this, even though we don't have social studies currently. Okay, this is one of the partners that Arnie Duncan doesn't want to tell everybody about is the Qatar Foundation International. They are the backer, who owns that is the government of Qatar. They are the financial backers of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, this building is going down in downtown DC near our Department of Education, and they have all kind of plans coming that are deep into the Common Core. Next slide. Okay, universities in the United States. Student visas, 75,000 student visas given out last year. They can't account for 15,000 of those students. Where are they? Never checked in. Saudis and Qatar are pumping millions into Middle Eastern studies departments. All your big schools. You got Georgetown, horrible. Harvard, Stanford, Duke, and even our local schools up in Cleveland area. Case Western Reserve, Baldwin Wallace, John Carroll, Kent, Oberlin, Cleveland State. They all have Middle Eastern Studies departments, and the Northeast Ohio Consortium of Middle Eastern Studies, NACMES, has a website, and here's their community partners, and you'll see smack dab in the middle is CARE. One of their community partners is an unindicted co-conspirator of the largest terrorism financing trial in the history of the United States. How is that possible? Next slide. Okay, local libraries. Our tax dollars are paying for the federal government to have Islamic books and huge displays of Islam-based material, 800 libraries around the country. And we're paying for it. It's going through grants. Next slide. Okay, here's a big one. Muslim chaplains or imams are certified by the Islamic Society of North America. So we have Muslim Brotherhood front groups responsible for certifying the chaplains which are going in the prisons and converting the prisoners to Islam. And it's happening at record pace. Next slide. The U.S. military. Muslim Brotherhood instructors were taught at the U.S. Naval Academy last summer. And a Muslim recruiting station on Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Next slide. People didn't believe me on this one. There's a picture. This is mandatory training that they have to go, Islam sensitivity training at Lackland Air Force Base, every Air Force cadet. Next slide. Okay, quick look at foreign policy. In Syria, it's a proxy war happening. Our enemies are fighting our enemies. You have Assad, Iran, and Hezbollah on one side, which are Shia, and you have the Syrian rebels, Al-Qaeda, and Muslim Brotherhood on the other side, which are Sunni. And we are funding the Muslim Brotherhood side. So Act for America's position, official position, was don't be sending them anybody any money or weapons or anything. Next slide. Okay, we can see what's going on. If you're paying attention, the Christians are getting slaughtered. They're told to either pay the jizya, convert, or die. And it's happening just this week in Mosul, Iraq, which And it's happening in Africa, it's happening in Syria, and we don't hear a word from our administration to stop this. Next slide. Okay, we tried to install the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Even Egyptians realized how bad the Muslim Brotherhood was. They got rid of Morsi, okay, and this is not even a Muslim question or a Muslim issue. Muslims in Egypt didn't want the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. Next slide. Benghazi. We don't have nearly enough time to get into this, okay? We can't ever forget this. Next slide. I don't have to say anything. Next slide. Okay. This is one thing I can definitely tell you about. Benghazi, he went to the UN. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. Okay, this had nothing to do with that supposedly YouTube video, okay? They try to blame it on that and see if they can get away with it. That YouTube video was seen by, I don't know, 1,000 people around the world. It had nothing to do with it. The reason, and another reason they were going to use that and why he went to the UN to pacify and appease, next slide, is because of UN 1618. You might not have heard of this, but this is another thing that Hillary was working with, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that I told you about earlier, and something called the Istanbul process because it started in Istanbul, Turkey. Okay, they want universal defamation of religious laws. They want us to follow UN 1618. They're trying to take away our freedom of speech. Not even criticize Sharia, anything Islam, anything Muslim. You can't even discuss it. Right now, what I would be doing would be technically illegal. I can't do this in Europe. I can't even tell you about this. Now, if you've realized, I haven't criticized Muhammad one time. I haven't criticized the religion of Islam one time. I'm telling you about a court case, okay, that's happened. In England, a couple months ago, Paul Weston was reciting something from Churchill, and he got arrested for that. That is absolutely nonsense. Okay, next slide. Okay, in 1991, the Cairo Declaration happened. The Islamic world's position on human rights was made clear, or 1990, when representatives of Muslim nations met in Cairo as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, and voiced their opposition to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. In place of the UN Declaration, they came up with the Cairo Declaration, which asserted that the only human rights Muslims recognize are those permitted under Islamic Sharia. Next slide. So you can see what we're up against. We're up against the OIC, political correctness, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Next slide. So one of the answers to this, and this is what I'm started to tell you about in the beginning, is American laws from American courts. Okay, House Bill 513, state law in 8 states, and it's so well written that it has not been challenged one time. Okay, next slide. One of the ways to stop this is interfaith outreach. Imams are using uninformed pastors, priests, and rabbis to stop ALAC. So the public needs to be educated. What they do is they say, you really don't want to support this law because it's going to wreck all the bridge building efforts that we've made over the years. When nothing could be further from the truth, a pastor, a rabbi, priest should say, if you really want to build a bridge, say you're here to support our Constitution, and say you have no interest in having any portion of Sharia applied in our law, in our courts. Next slide. Next slide, please. I got about 4 more. I'm going to close. I just want to play this one last time, 6 seconds. Go ahead. Just click on him.
To change the Constitution of America.
Next slide. Okay, so what can you do? Push your federal legislators on federal Act for America legislation. Push your state legislators on ALAC or Ohio House Bill 513. Next slide. Okay, how can you do this? Sign up for Act for America emails. Go to the website actforamerica.org or email me at actcleveland@gmail.com and ask to be included on my mailing list. Just like Ted said, it's all about emails. That's the world we live in these days. Okay, I have business cards out there. You might have gotten them. I have 6 or 7 key websites of organizations that work with ACT for America where you can find all of this information. You can get ACT's daily email to get updates, especially what's going on right now in Israel and Hamas down in Gaza. Okay, things like that. And then my emails, I can email you. Downstate, I'm in Parma, Ohio. Okay, so I don't expect you to come up to our meetings. If you're in Greater Cleveland, that's fantastic, but at least we can communicate via email. Next slide. There's pretty much a summary. Bottom line is support ALAC. Share the information, like Ted said, with your family and friends. Post to Facebook and Twitter. Whatever you're comfortable doing, everything means something, or whatever you do means something. Stay in touch with me. I will let everyone know when to push the legislature. It's sitting in Judiciary Committee now. I'm talking about the bill. Matt Lynch will tell me when it's time to get everybody involved, to put the pressure on the Speaker of the committee, the Judiciary Committee, Speaker Butler, and then, or Chairman Butler, and then Speaker Batchelder. And we're trying to get it done this session. Now, it may not, but at least we're on the agenda. And quite frankly, this is not an establishment versus Tea Party issue. It really shouldn't be. It's an American issue. It shouldn't be Democrat, Republican. This should be everybody. This ALAC was adopted in the Republican National Committee, their platform in 2012, in less than a minute, unanimously. They read the bill, everybody said, we're good, boom, done. Now, we got the convention up in Cleveland. That same thing should happen in 2016. How could Governor Kasich not possibly sign this bill with that convention coming? So we'll see, won't we? We will see. That's all I have. I need your help. Thank you.